Ron Leibman, the Emmy and Tony-winning actor, lived his final years in a modest but elegant Spanish-style villa in the hills of Los Feliz, Los Angeles. Tucked away on a quiet, winding street shrouded by tall sycamores and ivy, the house was built in the 1930s, a stucco facade, deep red tile roofing, and wide, arched doorways opening into shadowy interiors. After Ron Leibman passed in 2019, the house sat empty for 2 years, fading beneath layers of dust and neglect, before a couple from Portland, Kevin and Marissa Foster, purchased it in 2022. They were in their mid-30s. Kevin worked remotely as a data engineer, while Marissa, a freelance graphic designer, was drawn to the house for its charm and history. She had a fascination with old Hollywood, not knowing much about Leibman other than his brief role on Friends. What they didn't know was the house had an unsettled reputation even before Leibman's death. Whispers of isolation, strange electrical malfunctions, and sensations of being watched. Yet none of it made it into the official disclosures. The first night they slept there, a storm rolled in, though the forecast had been clear. Heavy winds battered the house, and the power flickered. Kevin was awoken around 3 a.m. by what he thought was music, low, muffled, and jazzy, like something playing through an old phonograph. He followed the sound downstairs, only to find silence the moment he crossed into the living room. No stereos, no devices running. He chalked it up to half-sleep and the storm outside. But the next morning, Marissa, pale and disoriented, mentioned she had vivid dreams she saw an older man pacing in their bedroom, muttering words she couldn't make out. His presence felt heavy, almost resentful. Kevin set up his home office in what used to be Leibman's study, a small room with oak panel walls and built-in bookshelves. He kept hearing footsteps above him, but there was no room overhead, just the clay-tiled roof. Often, during calls, his webcam would glitch, freezing on a distorted, darkened figure behind him, even though no one was there. One evening, after his computer crashed unexpectedly, he found a single file on his desktop, a text document containing the phrase, "It's still my house." The file vanished when he tried to open it again. Marissa, an avid photographer, decided to document the interior before they began renovations. She snapped dozens of photos, but when she uploaded them, several frames showed an indistinct figure, an older man, sharp-featured, standing in the corners, blurred but undeniably present. When she compared it to Leibman's old headshots, her stomach dropped. The resemblance was uncanny. She started feeling watched constantly, especially when she worked alone in the house. Her designs grew darker, her mood dimmed, and she developed a habit of leaving lights on in every room, though it barely helped. One afternoon, a deliverman mentioned offhand, "You know there's a door in your basement that leads nowhere, right? Weird spot to brick it up." Kevin hadn't explored the basement fully yet. When he finally did, he found a narrow, rusted door hidden behind paint cans and old shelves, but it was welded shut. The air near it was cold and heavy, unnaturally so. They both began hearing whispers when near the door, as if someone was speaking just beyond the steel and concrete. Research revealed that Leibman had that door sealed in the late 1990s, citing structural instability, though no records supported that claim. Weeks passed, and their sleep was constantly disturbed. Marissa's dreams returned, more vivid, now hearing clear muttering. "They forgot me here. This is still mine. You don't belong." They contacted a local historian who confirmed that Leibman, known for his intense and sometimes difficult temperament on set, had grown increasingly paranoid in his later years. He believed someone was watching him in the house, though no one ever was. Neighbors recalled him staring out his windows for hours, as if waiting for someone or something. One night, Kevin awoke to the sound of heavy breathing right by his ear. When he opened his eyes, he swore he saw an old man's face, stern, glaring, inches from his own before it dissolved into the dark. That same night, every door in the house slammed in sequence, one after another, as if someone was storming through every room in rage. Their cat, normally docile, screeched in terror and disappeared into the basement, never to be found again. Marissa and Kevin left the house 2 days later, abandoning most of their furniture and belongings. They never spent another night there. The house remains unsold, quietly rotting behind a high ivy-covered wall. Real estate listings come and go, but no one ever commits. Neighbors say lights still turn on at night, though the power was disconnected months ago. Some believe Ron Leibman's energy never left tied to the home he spent his last years in, pacing, resentful, and unwilling to let go of what he considered his stage, his fortress. And from the street, if you listen carefully on a windless night, you might still hear jazz music drifting faintly through the shuttered windows. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Kevin had wanted to believe that time away from the house would settle his mind, that the memories of the shadows, the faces, the sounds, would start to dull like a bad dream upon waking. But weeks later, even in the sterile calm of their temporary apartment in Echo Park, the sense of dread clung to him. His days were numb, but his nights remained restless. He couldn't stop picturing that basement door, the rust flaking like dried blood around its hinges, and the pressure in the air around it, like a vacuum waiting to pull something through. Marissa, too, had changed in ways neither of them fully understood. She grew withdrawn, quieter than Kevin had ever seen her. She refused to speak about the house directly, though her drawings had shifted. All her design work carried the same figure now, barely noticeable unless you searched for it. The outline of a man watching from corners, sometimes through a doorway, sometimes in reflections. She claimed she wasn't aware she was doing it. One late evening, Kevin sat alone on the apartment's small balcony, looking over the city lights below, and felt a chill even though the air was warm. A melody, soft and scratchy like an old record played on poor speakers, brushed past his ears, that same tune he had heard in the house. He sat upright, scanning the street below, but nothing stirred. Still, the music faded into the night like it had followed them, stretching across the miles. The thought became unbearable. The house wasn't done with them. A week later, Kevin received an email from a realtor who had been trying to sell the Leibman property for months. She had found more of Leibman's personal effects boxed up in a hidden closet off the upstairs hallway, things no one had cataloged before, scripts annotated in scrawled handwriting, old personal letters, and a journal. Despite his apprehension, something gnawed at Kevin, a need to understand the thing that still seemed to haunt them both. He agreed to pick up the box himself. When he pulled up to the house under a pale, gray morning, the air felt heavy again, as if the house recognized him. The facade was unchanged, the flaking stucco, the vines creeping up the sides, the same lifeless windows like eyes watching his every step. Inside, the realtor, a woman in her 60s named Lila, stood impatiently in the doorway, clutching the box. She refused to step further in. "I'm telling you," she muttered. "I don't care what you think. This house isn't just empty. It breathes. It watches. I'm done coming here alone." She shoved the box into his arms and hurried back to her car, leaving Kevin standing in the threshold, the dark yawning inside the house like a mouth waiting to swallow him. But Kevin didn't leave right away. Something compelled him to step in, slowly, cautiously, past the heavy wooden door that closed with a thud behind him. The air was cool, carrying that familiar scent of old wood and something more metallic, like rusted iron. Dust floated in sunbeams breaking through narrow, grimy windows, and the whole place felt preserved in time, still, expectant. Kevin made his way to the study, his old office, the walls lined with empty bookshelves and an abandoned desk sitting under a veil of dust. He could hear faint creaking above, as though footsteps paced slowly in the ceiling where there was no room for anyone to walk. He opened the box right there on the desk. Inside, the journal was bound in cracked black leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. Leibman's handwriting was sharp, slanted, impatient. Kevin skimmed through it, seeing passages about film sets, frustrations with agents, and mentions of her. But then the entries darkened. June 3rd, 2001. Something's here. Every time I sit in the study, I feel it just behind me. I can't see it, but I know. I hear myself thinking in voices that aren't mine. August 12th, 2002. I heard music last night, and I haven't owned a record player since the 80s. Jazz, slow, deep, like smoke curling through the air. I followed it, but the house was empty. I'm not sleeping much. December 24th, 2003. I see her now, in my dreams, but she isn't a woman. She's something in the shape of a woman. She lives behind the basement door. She doesn't want me to leave. I can't leave. She won't let me. Kevin's breath caught. A sharp, cold draft slipped through the study, raising the hairs on his neck. Something shifted in the air, subtle but certain, like the walls themselves were listening. He heard a soft sound, then almost a whisper, and turned sharply to the doorway. No one. Just the long hallway stretching dimly toward the living room. Yet he was certain he hadn't been alone. When he looked back down at the journal, the pages he'd left open were turning by themselves, though no breeze was strong enough to move them. The pages flipped faster until they stopped at the very last one. Only a single phrase was written there, in thick, uneven strokes. "You've let her out." Kevin slammed the book shut. A sound echoed somewhere deep in the house, the muffled clang of metal, like a heavy latch unlatching. Then the breathing began. Low, raspy, just behind him. Kevin froze where he stood, the journal still clutched tightly in his hands. That breathing, heavy, labored, impossibly close, pressed at the back of his neck like damp breath on skin. For a long moment he didn't dare turn. Every muscle in his body strained to remain still, as if any movement might provoke whatever stood just behind him. But the breathing didn't fade. It deepened, the wheezing punctuated by faint, guttural murmurs, as though someone struggled to form words through lungs that no longer knew air. The sound circled him, slow and deliberate, like a presence pacing, inspecting. And though Kevin's rational mind screamed that it wasn't possible, his senses betrayed him. He could smell it now. A stale, sour odor, like mildew and sweat baked into old fabric. When he finally gathered the nerve to turn around, the study was empty. The doorframe, the hallway beyond, nothing moved. But something had changed. The air felt bruised, disturbed, like a space freshly vacated. Yet then from somewhere deeper in the house came another noise. The sharp, metallic grind of the basement door. Kevin's heart pounded. He hadn't touched that door since they first explored the basement. As far as he knew, it was still sealed, still rusted and welded shut. But the sound, the groaning of old hinges, the scrape of metal against concrete kept coming, rhythmic, as if a latch was being worked over and over. He stepped out of the study slowly, his shoes creaking on the warped wood floor. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by streaks of pale morning light slicing through thin curtains. Dust floated in the air, but it seemed disturbed, now stirred, as though someone had just passed through moments before him. He paused at the top of the basement steps. The stairwell gaped below, swallowed in shadow. A smell wafted up, stronger now, metallic, damp, almost coppery, like old blood. And then, as clear as a whisper at his ear, he heard it, a voice, low and cracked. "Come down." It wasn't Leibman's voice. It was something else, deeper, older, feminine but wrong, like the echo of a woman submerged underwater. The words stretched unnaturally, carrying a cold gravity that pulled at the back of his mind, compelling him forward. Kevin gripped the banister, the wood gritty beneath his palms, and forced himself to descend one step, then another. The creak of each board beneath his feet echoed too loud, like the house amplified every sound he made. About halfway down, his eyes adjusted to the gloom. He could just make out the basement. A wide, unfinished space of concrete walls, a slatted window near the ceiling, half blocked by dirt and leaves. And there at the far wall was the door. It wasn't sealed anymore. The welded seams had been torn open, ragged edges twisted outward like something had forced its way through from the other side. The door hung slightly ajar, a darkness beyond it blacker than the unlit basement. Kevin's stomach twisted. He tried to step back, but his body refused. Every part of him was fixed, compelled forward by that voice still curling in his ears, beckoning. Then a figure. Something stood just beyond the door, its shape barely distinct against the black. A woman, no, not a woman, tall, thin, her body shifting subtly, like smoke trying to remember how to hold a shape. Long hair clung to the sides of her face, but her features refused clarity, as though his eyes weren't allowed to understand them fully. She swayed slightly, her head tilting to one side as if studying him. "You opened it," she said. And though her mouth didn't seem to move, the words were plain and sharp, speaking directly into his mind. Kevin's knees nearly gave, but his grip on the railing kept him standing. She stepped forward, no sound, no weight, as if her feet never fully touched the ground. The air thickened with cold, his breath clouding in front of him, though the summer morning should have brought heat. He could hear her breathing now, deep and slow, louder than before, reverberating off the concrete like a second heartbeat layered under his own. Then, behind her, deeper in the impossible dark, Kevin caught glimpses of other shapes half seen, shifting, forms lingering just beyond the door's frame. Limbs, faces, expressions frozen mid-scream, like shadows caught in the walls themselves. His mind tried to reject it, to tell him it was his imagination, a trick of the light, of stress, of old fears brought back, but some deeper part of him knew. They had always been there, waiting. The woman stepped closer, her form beginning to sharpen, not fully, never fully, but enough for Kevin to see her eyes. They were not human. Large, deep, reflecting no light, as if staring into two endless wells of black water. "It's mine again," she whispered, or maybe not. Maybe the words were simply inside him now, like thoughts he could not unthink. Kevin wanted to run, to scream, to flee up those stairs and never return. But his legs wouldn't move. The basement seemed to lengthen, stretching impossibly far from the safety of the stairwell, as if the house itself was shifting, expanding to keep him there. And then, he heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, measured. A man's footsteps. A voice called down faintly, low, familiar. "Kevin? You came back." He recognized it instantly. Ron Leibman. Kevin's breath caught, his body frozen in the half-step down the basement stairs. He knew that voice, remembered it from interviews, old recordings. It was unmistakably Ron Leibman. But Leibman was dead. There was no mistaking that. The man had been buried years ago, his life extinguished along with whatever force once animated him. Yet above, in the dead house, the heavy steps moved again, crossing slowly from one creaking floorboard to the next, deliberate, confident. "Kevin?" The voice called again, deeper now, trailing with an unmistakable familiarity. "You didn't finish what you started." His mind thrashed between choices. Retreat upstairs toward a dead man's voice, or move forward toward the swaying, shadow-cloaked figure in the basement. The woman by the broken door, if she was even a woman, watched without moving further, her presence like gravity itself, keeping Kevin from bolting. And then from the top of the stairs a shadow cast across the walls, broad-shouldered, the silhouette of a man. Kevin could see the edge of his frame just barely, a human shape where the light from upstairs poured weakly through. "I stayed here," the voice grumbled. "I had to stay with her. She made sure of it." Kevin's knees trembled. His voice cracked as he tried to answer. "Ron." The shadow paused, then shifted, the head tilting, just like the woman had done. "It's not Ron anymore." Suddenly, the house shuddered, a deep, low vibration, like the foundation itself groaned under the weight of something ancient waking beneath it. The air pressed against Kevin's chest, making each breath sharp, shallow. From the basement floor, a cold vapor seeped out, slow and curling around his feet, bringing the scent of wet stone and decay. The woman stepped closer from the broken door. In her wake, the darkness behind her seemed to swell, and Kevin saw that the walls inside the room beyond weren't just dark, they were lined with faces. Faint, twisted impressions of human faces embedded into the stone. Eyes shut, mouths open mid-scream, like screams that had never ended but had long since been silenced. "They all stayed," the woman murmured, her voice like wind slicing through trees. "They all joined me. So will you." Above, the footsteps returned slow, rhythmic, approaching the stairs. Kevin watched in horror as the shadow on the landing grew clearer, limbs bending and moving, but slightly off, as though the figure's bones remembered how to move but not quite perfectly. Then, Kevin felt it, something behind his eyes, inside his head, a pressure like fingers trying to pry open his thoughts. Flashes of Leibman's final days spilled into him without consent. Days of pacing the halls alone, talking to himself, afraid to sleep, hearing the same voice, her voice, in the walls under the floors. Leibman had sealed the door, but too late. She was already free inside his mind. Kevin saw Leibman's last night sitting alone in the study, drinking bourbon, hearing the jazz music play by itself before quietly collapsing in the chair, heart seized by something colder than death. But Kevin was still alive, still breathing. He tore his gaze from the woman and scrambled back up the stairs, his muscles finally obeying. The shadow on the landing lunged, but too slow its form stuttered like a faulty projection, moving in jerks and flickers. Kevin shot past it, its fingers brushing his arm like brittle ice. He burst into the hallway, panting, and raced for the front door, but the house shifted again. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the doorways narrower. The front door was there so close, but no matter how many steps he took, it didn't get nearer. Like the house stretched the space between him and escape. Then the music began. That slow, haunting jazz melody, curling through the air, as if from an old turntable. The same track, playing over and over thick brass tones, a lazy trumpet, the sound coated in static. Kevin staggered, disoriented, his vision tilting. The house pulsed around him, the wallpaper shifting subtly, like veins pulsing under skin. But then the journal, still clutched in his hand, still open. His eyes fell on a scribbled note near the back, in a frantic, desperate scrawl. She lives in sound. She feeds on memory. Silence is the only key. Kevin acted without thinking. He grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a side table and sprinted into the study, where an old radio sat dusty on a shelf, the likely source of the music. Without hesitation, he swung the candlestick down, smashing the radio into pieces. The music cut off instantly. The house groaned deeper this time, a bellow of pain and rage vibrating through the floorboards. He could hear the woman screaming, her voice fracturing into something guttural, inhuman. The shadow on the stairs shrieked, a sound like wood splintering and glass cracking. And just like that, the house released him. The front door stood fully visible again, clear, and without delay. Kevin sprinted for it, flung it open, and threw himself into the sunlight outside. He collapsed on the walkway, the heat of the morning burning into his skin. But the air was clear, no music, no voices. Behind him, the house stood as it always had. Still, silent, shuttered. But the air around it trembled, as though holding its breath. Kevin didn't wait to see what followed. He ran to his car, shaking, his mind fractured but his body alive. As he sped away, tires screeching down the quiet street, he dared to look in the rearview mirror. There, in the upper window of the house, he saw her, the woman standing just behind the glass, watching, unmoving. Her eyes reflected no light, and beside her, barely visible in the dimness, stood the hunched figure of Ron Leibman, or what was left of him, staring out, a permanent guest. Kevin never returned to that house. No one has. But sometimes, on still nights, neighbors claim to hear faint jazz music drifting down the street, a slow, mournful tune, barely there, as if the house is still waiting for its next occupant. And the door in the basement is still open. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.